The men known to history as Reginald and Ronald Kray were identical twin brothers born on the 24th of October 1933 in Hoxton, in the East End of London, England. Their father, Charles David Kray, was born on the 10th of March 1907 in Shoreditch, also in the East End of London. Although Kray is an Austrian name, the Krays were descended from gypsies and came from a working-class background, with Charles's father working as a stallholder at Petticoat Lane Market in London. Charles himself made a living as a wardrobe and jewellery dealer. When World War II broke out in 1939, compulsory military service began, but Charles refused to participate and spent over 2 decades evading authorities who pursued him as a deserter. Charles liked to drink and had a violent streak, often physically abusing his wife, which on one occasion resulted in 16-year-old Ronnie punching his father in the face. On the 8th of March 1983, after 50 years of marriage, Charles died. Some suggested that his death was related to the death of his beloved wife 7 months earlier. The reason his twins did not attend his funeral is debated, with some speculating that it was due to the intense press attention at the time, while others suggest it was caused by the poor relationship they had with their often absent and abusive father. Their mother, Violet Annie Lee, was born on the 5th of August 1909 in Bethnal Green in the East End of London. Of Irish and Jewish descent, she was the daughter of the well-known and successful East End boxer, juggler and poet Jimmy Cannonball Lee. Nicknamed Doodle or Violet by her family, Violet was rebellious in character and married Charles David Kray on the 6th of March 1926 secretly at a registry office. Jimmy Lee was furious upon learning about the wedding, as he not only opposed her associating with the Kray family, but she was underage and did not have her parents' blessing. Violet's rebellion destroyed her relationship with her father and forced her to move out of her family home. In 1927, 4 months after the wedding, she gave birth to her first son, Charles James, with some speculating that her pregnancy had triggered a decision to marry hastily. Following Charles's birth, the couple had a baby girl in 1929 who died shortly after birth, and then 4 years later the twins, who were often called Ronnie and Reggie, were born 10 minutes apart. Violet was often left to raise her 3 sons alone while her husband moved around London to evade military duty, leading to hardship for her. At one point, she even sold her wedding ring to ensure that her children were fed. On the 4th of August 1982, Violet died after a fight against cancer. Her twins adored their mother, with Ronnie describing her in a poem as a rose, and following her death, many tributes were received, describing her as a kind and generous lady who loved her sons unconditionally. The twins were born in a nation recovering from the chaos and global economic collapse of the Great Depression, which had been triggered by the American Wall Street crash of October 1929. The crash had sent stock values plummeting overnight as business investment and creditor loans were recalled, and British export demand was drastically reduced, thus resulting in high unemployment of approximately 2.5 million people, roughly 25% of the total population of working age. While some parts of suburban London fared okay during the dark days of the Great Depression, the East End was stricken with poverty and overcrowding, giving even more credit to the Victorian beliefs of the East End being a slum and the darkest London. By 1932, the British economy had started to recover following legislation which withdrew Great Britain from the gold standard international monetary system, which effectively translated the value of money into quantities of gold with the aim of preventing inflation. Supporters of the gold standard argued that it restricted control of interest rates, which was necessary to mitigate economic threats such as high unemployment. This withdrawal, coupled with a reduced tax on exports, triggered growth. However, the social and political divisions born during the Depression continued to escalate, with the Battle of Cable Street on the 4th of October 1936 one of several violent clashes between anti-Semitic fascists led by politician Sir Oswald Mosley and East End locals who came out into the streets to stop him. Mosley selected the East End for the political march as it had a high population of Jewish people living there, but members of the opposing Communist Party also came to defend the area, building barricades and adopting the phrase, "They shall not pass." When Mosley's 3,000-strong march became overwhelmed by around 100,000 people, the marchers could not complete their route, and in the ensuing street fight, around 175 were injured on both sides. For many Londoners, the street battle between fascists and East Londoners armed with bricks and bats was transformed from a local scuffle into the day that Britain stood up to fascism. However, for many of those defending the barricades, there was a second enemy they battled against on that day, which resulted in the arrests of 150 people. The East End of London had a long-standing distrust of the police, a distrust born from decades of confrontation driven by poverty and crime, resulting in an understanding that people would not talk to the authorities, and those that did would be outcast or face violent consequences. As the world lurched towards World War II, and with the British economy fluctuating, conditions for East Enders remained precarious. Despite the whirl of large-scale challenges to global peace and order, Cockneys maintained their long-standing sense of pride for their shared identity, despite a relatively diverse population through the East End's history of attracting immigrants. One constant for those in the East End was the popularity of boxing, seen as an opportunity to gamble or fight to better one's prospects. Everyone, it seemed, was connected to the sport. The Kray twins were no exception. From a young age, boxing played an important role in the twins' lives. Their eldest brother even represented the Royal Navy in a fight organized in 1943. Crime, poverty, and little cooperation with the police meant the East End was a dangerous place to grow up in, and an area where the rough-and-tumble world of the slums taught children how to fight and defend themselves. The twins spent their infancy in Haggerston, London, where, at the age of 3, they contracted and survived diphtheria, one of many conditions of the East End driving high infant mortality rates. At the age of 5, they began their education in 1938 at Wood Close School. However, that same year, the family moved to 178 Valence Road, a small Victorian 2-up, 2-down terrace house in Bethnal Green, East London, which later gained the nickname Fort Valence. In 1939, the twins took up boxing after being encouraged by their granddad Jimmy Lee, who installed a punch bag in their house, and they showed natural talent for the sport, remarkably never losing a bout throughout their childhood and up to the age of 19. Reggie was a more skillful boxer and was calculated in his technique, while Ronnie developed an aggressive animalistic style in his boxing. The combination made the twins difficult to control or overcome. Yet, even as young men, a violent streak began to show itself, no better demonstrated than when on holiday caravanning in Kent, the twins allegedly practiced punching by taking turns knocking out a tethered horse. With the start of World War II, the twins rarely saw their father and were raised by their mother, who some sources say instilled in them a sense that they were more special than most people and only needed one another, helping the twins develop a close bond, while others argue this parental approach also helped to develop a malignant narcissism in the twins. In 1940, they were evacuated from London, which was being bombed heavily in the Blitz, and together with their mother and older brother Charlie, lived with a property owner in a small Suffolk town called Hadley, and began attending Bridge Street Boys' School. The experience delighted the twins as they had their first experience of countryside living, and the twins sledded on the hills in the winter and played outside. Almost a year later, the boys were upset when Violet moved them back to bomb-damaged London in order to be with her friends and family back in the East End. The twins' mistrust of the police and authority figures was solidified at an early age. Around 1940, when coming back on a train from a picnic with his family, Reggie fired an air pistol out of the window, which was spotted by a guard who took him and disciplined him in the train's locked cabin. Upon being released, Reggie told his mother that they had gone over the top with their punishment, whether physical or verbal, and Violet reacted incredibly defensively towards the twins, showing her anger at the guard, which reinforced a growing resentment towards authority figures. With their father being pursued, the twins and their mother would also often receive a knock on the door from police inquiring about his whereabouts. These stop-bys and the lies told to the police helped solidify the willingness of the twins to lie to authorities. Another incident, which occurred around 1940, had an impact on the Kray twins and particularly Reggie. He had been playing with a friend who had been hired by a truck driver to start the engine and load the cargo. Reggie sat in the passenger seat when the ignition was turned on, but with the vehicle accidentally left in gear, the truck jumped backwards into a concrete barrier, crushing a nearby 6-year-old boy. When the two friends got out to see what had happened, they found the child dead with a severely damaged head. Shocked, Reggie later learned that the boy was a twin, further increasing the tragedy in his mind. The truck driver, afraid of losing his pension, convinced the friends to lie about what had happened to the police. They denied that they were hired to start the truck, stating that they did it of their own accord. Reggie resented the driver for putting his pension above the child's life, and the event created more distrust with authority figures and adults throughout his formative years. From 1944 until December 1948, the twins attended Daniel Street School in Bethnal Green, and some sources suggest Ronnie had a low IQ. However, he was a keen reader and was interested in books about American gangsters such as Al Capone in the 1920s. At this early age, both boys showed aggressive streaks, and Ronnie had a notoriously short temper and frequently got into street fights. During this same period of adolescence, Ronnie began to show signs of being attracted to both sexes. Rumours began to abound about the boys, though the attention given to the twins' intimate lives has only increased as their fame has grown. Upon leaving school, the twins got jobs at Billingsgate Fish Market in London and worked there for 6 months, the longest legitimate employment they would ever hold, with Reggie trained as a salesman and Ronnie hired as an empty boy, who would collect empty fish boxes during the weekdays. While working at the fish market, they also spent time on the weekends helping out with their grandfather's market stall. Outside of work in 1949, the twins continued to get into trouble, on one occasion getting into a fight outside a dance club in Hackney, which resulted in one of the other boys reporting the Krays to the police, who charged them with grievous bodily harm, before dropping the case due to lack of evidence. The following year, in 1950, when the twins and friends were hanging around outside a shop, Ronnie was forcefully pushed from behind, and upon turning round to see the perpetrator, he was met by a policeman who was telling the group to disperse as they were loitering. Ronnie was very sensitive to people touching him, and with one punch to the jaw he knocked the policeman unconscious, thereby sending the boys fleeing from the scene. When the pursuing police later found the twins, Ronnie was arrested, which infuriated Reggie, who returned to the shop and allegedly found the policeman who had been punched by his brother and proceeded to knock him out for a second time, before being arrested, thus joining Ronnie in the police cell. The incident resulted in probation for the twins when they were released. On the 31st of July 1951, both twins boxed at the arena at Mile End, London, with Reggie winning on points and Ronnie scoring a knockout in his bout. A month later, Reggie won another fight in the ring, and as September came in, they were both competing again at Wembley Town Hall, where they won their respective fights. In October, Reggie fought alone at the National Sporting Club at Piccadilly, where he won on points, and later that month, both twins won again in separate bouts at Shepherd's Bush. On the 19th of November, Reggie won again at the National Sporting Club in Mayfair, while Ronnie lost through disqualification in the same month before both were selected to fight at the Albert Hall in December, joining their brother Charlie, who also made the bill, which ended in another victory for Reggie, while Ronnie was again disqualified for unsportsmanlike conduct. Following this fight, Reggie was offered a professional contract, a seeming escape from the poverty of the East End. However, his conduct out of the ring ended his budding career when, in January 1952, the twins were involved in a large brawl outside a nightclub, which the boxing regulator discovered and consequently revoked his license. In March 1952, the twins were drafted into the British Army, and they reported to the Royal Fusilier garrison at the Tower of London. The twins were confident and perhaps arrogant, as they hoped to be hired as physical fitness instructors. Upon arriving at the Tower of London and demanding their preferred positions, things took a turn for the worse. The recruiting corporal who met them was decidedly put out by the audacity of their request. Angered, the twins went to leave, and the corporal attempted to stop them by grabbing Ronnie's arm, who responded by punching the corporal in the jaw and knocking him unconscious, before walking back to the East End, where they went to a local pub. The following day, the police arrested the twins and then handed them back to the military at the Tower of London. The military charged the twins for absence without leave and for assaulting the corporal. The young men vehemently denied the charges and urged the man to identify which brother had thrown the punch. Frustrated, the military locked the boys in a guardroom, from which the boys promptly escaped, launching an 8-month period of the twins being on the run. In September 1952, while still evading the authorities, the twins assaulted a policeman who had identified them and was attempting to arrest them, thereby adding more to their troubles. Finally tracked down, the twins were sent back to the Tower of London as some of the Tower's last prisoners, before being transferred to Shepton Mallet Military Prison in Somerset for 1 month, where they waited to face the consequences of their actions at a court-martial. While at Shepton, one of the fellow prisoners talked to the twins about protection rackets, where an individual would apply pressure on business owners to pay for the protection of their assets from criminals. This prisoner would have an impact far greater than he could have imagined. Following their conviction, both Ronnie and Reggie were sent to Buff's Home Counties Brigade Depot Prison in Canterbury, Kent. While in Kent, the twins began to dominate the prison population, and their behaviour worsened when it became clear they would be receiving a dishonourable discharge from the military. Over the next few months, they emptied a latrine bucket over a sergeant, poured hot tea over a guard, handcuffed another guard to prison bars, and set their bedding on fire, all the while building a gang of loyal inmates which allowed them to govern the communal areas. The twins, ever looking for a way out, assaulted a guard and briefly escaped. However, they were soon recaptured and dragged back to Kent. Still, the twins had built a reputation among both the prisoners and guards, so much so that on the last day of their military sentence, they enjoyed cider and cigarettes that had been provided by some of those responsible for guarding them. Although now officially discharged from the military, the twins learned from the experience and adopted some of its aspects into their lives, with Ronnie describing himself as the Colonel and the twins branding their home Fort Valence. In 1953, the twins were transferred to a civilian prison to serve for crimes committed while on the run from the military. Ronnie suffered mentally in this prison, and it was here that he was described by the prison psychologist as schizophrenic, psychopathic, and insane. In 1954, both twins were released from prison but were now burdened with criminal records. Their chances of becoming professional boxers were gone, as was an opportunity to work for the military. Instead, the boys began to delve deeper into the criminal underworld. With the post-war economic growth in Britain, prospects appeared better for all. The twins took control of a billiard hall called the Regal in Mile End, close to their home, after approaching the owner and offering security in exchange for the business lease. Keen to stop the various and persistent problems facing the establishment, the owner accepted the boys' offer. After being awarded the lease for 3 years, the boys quickly cleaned things up in less than a month. It became clear how the twins would operate. They delivered security for the establishment with an aggressive approach, which saw any troublemakers dealt with violently. Their mantra was that any man breaking things in the club would consequently end up with broken bones. The twins' criminal capital quickly grew as they defended their own turf. On one occasion, the twins were challenged by 5 Maltese men who entered the club and demanded protection money themselves. In response, Reggie drew a knife, while Ronnie pulled out a sword and chased the startled men from the establishment, which consequently resulted in some attention from the local newspapers, thereby further increasing their reputation in the East End. Attracting new members into what would later become known as the Firm, the twins began several other protection rackets in the area. They found more success as local businesses turned to the twins' gang for protection, thus eliminating the need for multiple protection gangs. The twins also began working for the Liverpool gangster J. Murray. The twins were involved as enforcer security for those planning hijackings, armed robberies, and arson. Their involvement with such crimes gave them increased capital to acquire more clubs, gambling halls, and properties. As their territory grew, the twins developed a code of conduct for the members of the firm, demanding that their members never hurt people who could not defend themselves. And though they supposedly banned robberies in their own jurisdiction to protect their image with the local populace, the twins made exceptions for those who would pay the twins compensation for their activities. In 1956, some sources allege that Ronnie shot a car salesman in the leg during a deal that went wrong. The victim was able to identify Ronnie to the police. However, no prosecution was made when Ronnie pretended to be Reggie, who had an alibi at the time. In November of the same year, Ronnie was prosecuted for an assault when he stabbed a member of a rival gang known as the Watney Streeters at the Britannia pub. The Streeters were trying to hold on to their patch of the East End in the face of the twins' growing firm, and Ronnie's attack only egged on the conflict. Following the stabbing, the Streeters retaliated with a violent attack on one of the Krays' protected club owners, which was then followed by firm member Bobby Ramsey's assault on one of the Watney Streeters' leading gang members in the Artichoke pub on Stepney Way. The police arrested Ronnie for his part in the clashes when he stabbed a member of the Watney Streeters with a bayonet, leading to his conviction of wounding with intent and firearms possession. Ronnie was consequently sentenced on the 5th of November to 3 years in Wandsworth Prison in London. While in prison, Ronnie's mental health further deteriorated, and he convinced himself that Bobby Ramsey, who was also serving time, had referred to him as a grass, a slang term for those cooperating with the authorities, or even worse, exposing another member of the gang, an offence which drove Ronnie to attack and severely beat his own associate for what he perceived to be a cardinal sin. By December 1957, Ronnie had been transferred to the lower security Camp Hill prison on the Isle of Wight, where he suffered a mental breakdown on Christmas Day and was placed in a straitjacket. By February 1958, Ronnie was certified insane and was transferred to Long Grove Mental Health Hospital in Surrey, where he hallucinated that the patient opposite him was a dog. His mental health further collapsed, and he could no longer recognize once familiar people, but with time and prescription medication, his mental health did finally begin to improve, and he became increasingly conscious that the period he spent at the hospital did not count towards his sentence. During this time, Ronnie became depressed by the death of a close aunt and his distance from his family and friends, and finally he gave the word that he wanted to escape his prison full of mentally ill patients. In May of 1958, Reggie and his brother Charlie went to visit Ronnie in Long Grove. The twins were dressed in identical suits and shirts and proceeded to switch positions with each other in the toilet. As Ronnie walked casually out of the hospital prison with Charlie, Reggie stayed behind, completely fooling the guards concerning his identity. After waiting ample time for Ronnie to escape, Reggie presented his own ID and walked out of the hospital himself after telling the guards his twin had gone to get him a cup of tea. Officials later contacted Reggie and pleaded for Ronnie's return, stating there would be no investigation if Ronnie turned himself in. Ronnie did not return as requested, and neither did he continue to take his medication, leading to a deterioration in his mental health and to other firm members becoming afraid of his unpredictable behavior. Ronnie returned voluntarily to Long Grove in October 1958, though not before securing an agreement that, as he had demonstrated mental functionality over the 5 months on the run, he should be reassessed by doctors there. After being put back on medication, the following month he was transferred back to Wandsworth Prison, where he served the remainder of his original sentence before being released in 1961. While in prison, Ronnie met Jack McVitie, a known drugs trafficker who was known as the Hat due to his attempt to hide his loss of hair with a trilby. This connection proved to be very beneficial for the twins, for although McVitie never became an official member of the firm, he was one of the many associates that were connected to the twins who were often used as enforcers to help govern the business interests through violence and intimidation. While Ronnie served his sentence, in 1960 Reggie continued property expansion in the West End of London when he threatened the owner Peter Rackman into selling him Esmeralda's Barn Club, thereby increasing their influence and fueling a growing celebrity status for the twins. In the same year, the Betting and Gaming Act legalised private casinos in Britain, which brought a new group of moral, high-status individuals to the clubs as they were no longer deterred by the law. The twins opened the popular Double R Club, an upscale affair that was complete with a gambling hall and a boxing ring, which led them to associate with celebrities such as Frank Sinatra, Peter Sellers, Joan Collins, Judy Garland, Dusty Springfield, Barbara Windsor, and Cliff Richard over the next decade. The twins were also photographed several times by the high-profile photographer David Bailey. In addition, rich aristocrats and members of parliament came to the twins' clubs, thereby connecting the twins to the engines of British political power. Not only were the twins at the peak of high society, but they were also never more powerful in the underworld of crime. Although suspected of an assault believed to be in retaliation against those responsible for Ronnie's incarceration, Reggie successfully kept on the right side of the law. Reggie also led the twins into a new era of prosperity through many successful business decisions made in coordination with a banker called Alan Cooper, who wanted the Krays' protection from the Richardson gang. This rival organisation, based in South London, was also known as the Torture Gang, due to their methods of dealing with enemies. As both organisations expanded territorially in West London, tensions began to escalate between the rival gangs. During this period, Reggie's level head helped not only expand the twins' holdings in legitimate businesses, but also developed a network of hidden money laundering at racetracks. He also maintained the protection rackets that had started the twins into the London underworld. Now, however, the reputation of the twins had grown, so that the mere presence of a person associated with the firm was enough to protect a business. Often overlooked as he was less violent and not public-facing, the twins' eldest brother, Charlie, was an important component of the firm, with the responsibility of managing the financial aspect of nightclubs. The social revolution of the 1960s further increased the twins' reputation as growing numbers of people became ever more distrustful of government. Riding on this growing popularity, the twins styled themselves after the American gangsters in dark double-breasted suits with ties, overcoats, and large items of jewellery. Photographers were often invited to the clubs and to any charitable event the twins were engaged in, which resulted in a palatable Robin Hood perception for many who saw their deeds as taking from the rich and giving to the poor. Raising themselves from the working class to the owners of multiple clubs around London was a story that had appeal for people, and the acts of kindness and cockney charm they showed were certainly in part driven by a desire to maintain their image in both the criminal and non-criminal worlds. That said, the twins were still heavily involved in crime. During the early 1960s, at one of their clubs, they employed an act consisting of a dwarf dressed up like a cowboy, singing country songs and riding a donkey. After the act, Ronnie would go up onto the stage and lead the donkey to the bar, where he would get it a gin and tonic. One day, while he performed this ritual, a man in debt to the firm walked into the club and was spotted. Reggie later recalled how funny he found it as he watched Ronnie threaten and berate the man all the time with a donkey tethered in one hand and a gin and tonic in the other. In 1963, another incident played out where a Hollywood production company was shooting scenes for the film Sparrows Can't Sing when a string of limousines allegedly turned up on the East End set, with Ronnie and Reggie getting out and demanding to be told who had given permission for the shoot. After the production company negotiated in response to threats, a financial arrangement was made, and the twins went on to befriend the cast and bring them refreshments. Such anecdotal stories followed the Krays and boosted their reputation and perhaps appealed to those who held them as celebrity role models, although with the increased limelight came a renewed interest from the police. In 1963, Reggie was imprisoned after being charged for assaulting a rival gang member, leaving Ronnie with increased control while Reggie went on to serve a 2-year prison sentence. Ronnie bought into an investment idea which was originally promoted by a Member of Parliament called Ernest Shinwell, and effectively centred around a large housing development and construction of a factory in Enugu, Nigeria. Organised by their business manager Leslie Payne, Ronnie first met Lord Boothby as they were dining at the Government Palace of Westminster, where Boothby served in the Upper House, known as the House of Lords. He was a member of the Conservative Party with a high profile from television appearances in which he was often flamboyant while hiding his bisexuality from the public. Visiting the African township several times and meeting local dignitaries, the firm was ultimately unable to control the overseas project, and on one occasion they paid £5,000 in order to release Charlie Kray, who had had his passport confiscated while visiting the construction site. Ronnie built a friendship with Boothby, which some allege was far more intimate than platonic, and supposedly helped create a world at his parties where other powerful men could act on their sexuality. It was during 1964 that the press began to explore more openly the illegal homosexual activities associated with Ronnie Kray and his parliamentarian associates such as Lord Boothby and Labour MP Tom Dryburgh. In July 1964, the tabloid story was released by the Daily Mirror entitled "The Peer and Gangster, Yard Inquiry." It was careful not to name people but alluded to the identity of those involved, which effectively exposed Ronnie's sexuality alongside the unethical collusion between a lord and a criminal. Boothby was on holiday in France and called his friend Dryburgh to intervene when the story hit. However, the scandal escalated as the leadership from both parties, as well as the Prime Minister, Harold Wilson, became involved in investigating and attempting to suppress the story. A second tabloid story was published in September of the same year, exposing more alleged connections between Ronnie and Boothby and a string of young male lovers that the peer had been engaged with. For both parties' leadership, as well as the sitting government, the need to suppress this story was never more urgent. Wilson appointed his own top solicitor to represent Boothby, who successfully sued the newspaper, resulting in a settlement of £40,000, a public apology, and the dismissal of the newspaper's editor. At least £5,000 of the court settlement was gifted by Lord Boothby to the Krays. While these scandals were quickly being suppressed, a new enemy to the Krays was rising through the ranks of Britain's police force. Detective Chief Superintendent Leonard "Nipper" Reid had been recently promoted in Scotland Yard to the Murder Squad. His first assignment was to bring down the Kray twins' empire. Reid initially focused on financial crimes and racketeering activities, but his efforts were limited by government officials following the Boothby scandal. Newspapers became reluctant to print anything about the Krays, and there was a growing feeling by many that the firm was untouchable, given the far-reaching influence they had built. As the Boothby scandal unfolded during 1964, business became even more lucrative for the firm when they formed connections with the American Mafia, specifically the Commission, which was the headquarters of operations based in New York and made up of the 5 families, including the Montreal Cotroni family syndicate. Through ex-Hollywood actor George Raft, who had moved to London, the twins had made the transatlantic connection and met members of the Mafia who were keen to create a European arm of their business. They believed the Krays were the ones to ally with, particularly since the twins had such high connections in the British government. In 1965, a Royal Bank of Canada establishment was robbed in Montreal, which resulted in the bank's loss of financial bonds worth $50,000. Though the robbery was extremely successful, the Mafia had been unable to launder the bills due to the increased scrutiny of authorities. Turning to the Krays, the mafia was able to successfully smuggle the bills into the London Stock Exchange. Around $1 million worth of bonds were circulating from similar bank robberies in Montreal, and so the money laundering proved to be profitable, with mafia members Meyer Lansky and Angelo Bruno working the operation with corrupt businessman Leslie the Brain Payne, commissioned by the firm. In 1964, Ronnie flew to New York to meet Lansky and Bruno, but due to his criminal record was unable to enter the country. This did not stop the Krays' ongoing business with the mafia, nor their host of domestic business interests. Their international and domestic projects had created a boom of wealth for the twins during the 1960s. Though Payne eventually left the firm due to the twins' use of violence, as well as his own aversion to risk, the twins replaced him with American Alan Bruce Cooper, who was living in London. While immensely successful, legal troubles were brewing for the twins. On the 7th of January 1965, the Coventry Evening Telegraph reported that the twins had been arrested due to allegations of them menacing others, and they remained in police custody until the 15th of January. Allegedly, Reggie reacted nonchalantly, stating it was the authorities' job to investigate such occurrences. Ronnie, on the other hand, had expressed anger at what he perceived to be a concerted effort to incarcerate the twins. Further trouble ensued in April 1965 when Hugh McCowan, the son of a baroness, went to the police after he was approached by the twins to provide investment into the Enugu project. Hugh said the appeal for money was attempted extortion from the profits he was making on his popular business called the Hideaway Club. His allegations landed the twins once again in jail, but after spending several weeks in prison, the twins were acquitted at court when the judge threw the case out, citing the lack of witnesses other than McCowan. The twins were released and resumed their business activities, successfully going on to buy McCowan's club and renaming it El Morocco. Their political support was perhaps at its apex, with Boothby launching a furious campaign to defend the twins. In a letter to the Home Secretary, Boothby compared the authorities' witch hunting of the twins to that seen in Nazi Germany throughout the 1930s. He further expanded his efforts when, on the 15th of December 1965, Boothby defended the character of the twins in a statement he made to the House of Lords, in which he referenced the mishandling of an investigation into a firm associate, Leslie Holt, who had been found dead 2 years prior. This prompted the reopening of the murder case specifically focused on the twins' involvement, although lack of evidence meant no charges were ever made. Business was good for the firm, and Reggie began to consider a move towards a settled and increasingly legitimate life, while Ronnie continued to battle his demons, growing extremely paranoid. On the 19th of April 1965, Reggie married his love, Frances Elsie Shea, at St James's Church in Bethnal Green, London. Her father, Frank Shea Sr., was in charge of the gambling at the Regency Club, while her brother, Frank Shea Jr., sometimes worked for the twins as a driver for the firm, and it was through this connection that the couple had met. Her mother, Elsie Shea, disapproved of the relationship due to Reggie's criminal background, and she demonstrated this clearly when she attended the wedding in a black dress. Elsie's disapproval was shared by others, such as the first vicar who the couple approached to carry out the wedding. The man refused to conduct the ceremony due to Reggie's involvement with crime. Despite the hostility of some, many were thrilled by the match, and at a lavish reception at the Finsbury Park Hotel, their marriage was celebrated with the attendance of celebrities such as actress Diana Dawes, and it was described by one tabloid newspaper as the East End wedding of the year. The event was carefully managed by members of the firm, with Ronnie as best man creating a cordon of security. the twins controlled the entire event, even once admonishing the guests with the message, "Reggie wants you to sing," when the hymns started off rather lackluster during the ceremony. On Christmas Day 1965, the twins allegedly had a run-in at the Astor Club in Mayfair, London, with members of the Richardson gang, including George Cornell, who, during the altercation, called Ronnie a derogatory term for a homosexual man. Just over 2 months later, the rival gang's relations worsened, resulting in a shootout at a club called Mr. Smith's in Catford, East London, where the Richardsons killed Richard Hart, who was working with the firm. Although the police arrested and charged the core gang members of the Richardsons for murder, Cornell was still free as he was not present at the club when the gunfight had started, and the following evening, after visiting injured members of his gang, he went out for a drink. On the 9th of March 1966, Ronnie was informed that Cornell was at the Blind Beggar pub, located on the edge of Bethnal Green and Whitechapel in London. Although the twins had expensive cars, they were notoriously poor drivers, and so Ronnie was driven by Scotch Jack, John Dixon, and his assistant Ian Barry to go and intercept Cornell. When Ronnie and Barry walked into the pub armed with pistols, Cornell antagonistically said, "Well, look who's here," before Ronnie shot him in the head, an act witnessed by several people drinking in the bar. Barry shot his weapon into the air 5 times, having been taken by surprise by Ronnie's public recklessness, and he threatened the patrons and barmaid not to talk to the police as they looked on in horror. The Mafia saw the event as far too cavalier and began to pull back from their relationship with the firm. However, Reggie dissuaded them from breaking the laundering agreement on the basis that Barry's threats had apparently worked, and the witnesses stayed quiet. On the 12th of December 1966, the twins assisted Frank, the Mad Axeman, Mitchell in escaping from Dartmoor prison. Mitchell's nickname came from his violent history, which had occasionally involved an axe. Mitchell had met Ronnie while serving time at Wandsworth Prison and had an association with the Krays, amongst other gangs, but he felt that he was not being given a fair opportunity to have his case reviewed. Mitchell was one of a few prisoners trusted to undertake supervised work outside the prison walls, and when a guard granted his request to go and feed some nearby wild ponies, he walked to a quiet road and was picked up in a car by Kray associates before being hidden at a friend's house while the authorities searched for him. Mitchell's freedom became a growing problem for the twins as his mental health was poor and the man was difficult to control. This meant that the twins were unable to use him as a tool in their underground crime schemes. Because of his liability, rumours circulated that the twins ordered Mitchell to be shot, wrapped in chicken wire, and dumped in the English Channel, while another theory alleges he was smuggled out of the country. But there is no evidence around the fate of Mitchell other than his permanent disappearance. The twins seemed indomitable during the 1960s, but all was not well for the Kray twins. By 1967, Frances was living at her brother's flat, having separated from Reggie just 3 months into the marriage. She struggled to adjust to her new life, being often left alone. Even on her honeymoon, her husband worked and went out drinking each night without her. Often, the couple's fights developed into emotional abuse, with one account stating that Reggie deliberately cut his hands and dripped blood on her, knowing she hated the sight of blood. Her mental health deteriorated rapidly, and she attempted to end her own life on at least 2 occasions. She turned to street drugs and found herself increasingly isolated as she realized no other man was foolish enough to become involved with her, while her husband was still obsessively possessive. With their marriage on the rocks, the two appeared to have made an effort to get back together by making plans to go on a second honeymoon to Ibiza in Spain. Following their holiday booking, Frances attended a hospital appointment in a seemingly positive mood, but just 2 days later, on the 7th of June, she took her own life by overdosing on barbiturates. Frances had an ostentatious funeral costing £2,000, the equivalent of £30,000 today, with elaborate floral wreaths, including one which was 6 foot in length and was displayed at the service held at the same church the couple married in. Reggie demanded that his wife was to be buried in her wedding dress, contrary to the wishes of her family. Unproven theories emerged that Frances accidentally overdosed and was looking forward to the trip to Ibiza, or that Ronnie was filled with jealousy over the attention she received from his brother and therefore organized her murder himself. What is more certain is that Reggie was left genuinely devastated by the loss of his wife, often visiting her grave several times a day, and he was rumored to have kept the 2 plane tickets to Ibiza for the rest of his life. The funeral was only one problem facing the twins at this time. By 1967, Ronnie was becoming increasingly paranoid that Leslie Payne was going to blow the whistle on his past activities with the firm. In order to silence Payne, Ronnie offered Jack McVitie money to assassinate the former firm associate. Driving to Payne's house in Tulse Hill, South London, McVitie planned to shoot him as he opened his front door. However, the attempt failed, although Ronnie had already paid the fee. McVitie had previously been warned about his conduct, often drawing the firm's negative attention due to his issues with alcohol and drugs. The twins' patience finally ran out when McVitie failed to return the money to Ronnie and instead spent it on drink and pills. In October 1967, they invited McVitie to a party in a basement flat in Stoke Newington, northeast London, where they determined to resolve this apparent problem. Upon entering the party, Ronnie stood up, undeterred by the number of witnesses, and screamed at McVitie before attacking him. Reggie drew a pistol and pointed it at his minion, only to find the gun had seized and he was unable to shoot it. The twins then proceeded to attack McVitie brutally, killing the man in their rage. Members of the firm disposed of the body by wrapping it in an eiderdown and putting it in the back seat of a car, but when they ran out of fuel, they left the vehicle outside a church. The Krays raced to organize the eventual disposal, which saw McVitie's remains taken to New Haven, wrapped in chicken wire, and dumped in the English Channel. With a second relatively public murder behind them, Detective Reed was compiling mounting evidence in his pursuit to bring down the twins. More and more people were willing to come forward to give witnesses' statements, although no single charge was sufficiently supported. In the spring of 1968, the firm hired Alan Bruce Cooper to organize the purchase of explosives to make car bombs. When Cooper sent his associate, Paul Elvey, to Glasgow, Scotland, he was caught by the authorities and they were both arrested. Elvey confessed to 3 attempted murders. Cooper weakened the evidence when he claimed he was working for the US Treasury Department investigating the Krays' links with the mafia. However, this was not enough to deter the authorities, and the statement from Elvey, together with previous evidence, including an alleged collaboration with the wavering Kray associate Bobby Teal, led to the arrest of Ronnie, Reggie, and 15 members of the firm in a series of dawn raids involving around 120 police personnel on the 8th of May 1968. Reed ensured that security surrounding those arrested was tight and confined them in separate cells in order to ensure there was no collusion, while at the same time he offered members of the firm deals in exchange for testifying against each other. Loyalty amongst members of the firm had already been tested the previous year by the news of McVitie's murder, with many believing he didn't deserve such a gruesome death. Many wondered if any one of the firm was truly safe from the savagery of the twins. Upon their arrest, key witnesses came forward, such as Leslie Payne, who was bitter following his attempted assassination at the hands of the Krays, while other associates, such as Albert Donahue and driver Jack Dixon, cooperated when they discovered the twins planned to persuade them to take the fall for many of the charges. With each succeeding testimony, the evidence mounted against the twins and further divided the members of the fracturing firm. Each testimony provided more evidence and convictions of other firm members, which in turn led to more testimonies against the twins. It appeared that the police finally had the twins where they wanted them, in jail and without allies to help them escape. John Platts Mills, QC, represented the twins, and when the trial started in January 1969, he advised them to deny the double murder charges brought against them for killing McVitie and Cornell. He planned to instead create their defense by discrediting the witnesses because of their involvement in criminal activities. Lasting 3 months, and with people paying £5 for a seat in the public gallery, the trial of the Kray twins became Britain's longest and arguably highest-profile murder trial. The trial concluded with a 55-minute deliberation from the highly protected jury who found Ronnie and Reggie Kray guilty of murder. The judge, Justice Melford Stevenson, commented that society had earned a rest from their activities before handing them each a life sentence, no less than 30 years imprisonment, which was unsuccessfully appealed. Many more associates were incarcerated, including the twins' eldest brother Charlie, who was sentenced to 10 years for his involvement in the murders, and so the firm was torn apart at the very seams. The Kray brothers were sent to separate prisons, with Ronnie eventually being transferred to Broadmoor Top Security Psychiatric Hospital in order to deal with his mental health issues. While in prison, Ronnie released his autobiography called My Story in 1993, in which he told of a lady called Monica who he had dated for around 3 years prior to his arrest, and lovingly described her as the only girl he had ever liked in his life, while emphasizing he was in fact bisexual and not homosexual. Arrested before he could marry, Ronnie wrote around 60 letters to her from prison during the first year of his sentence, describing her as his little angel and little doll, with apparent reciprocal feelings from Monica, although she went on to marry one of his ex-boyfriends. This autobiography was vastly different from Ronnie's earlier memoir that gloried in his participation in crime and murder. On the 11th of August 1982, the twins' mother, Violet, died, and the twins were allowed to attend the funeral service at Chingford Mount Cemetery in East London, though they were not permitted at the burial in the Kray family plot. The funeral drew vast press attention and was attended by gangsters and celebrities who came to pay their respects, including famous mourners such as actress and singer Diana Dawes. The total policing bill for the day was estimated to cost around £30,000, likely a frustration to those who had worked so hard to put the twins behind bars. The twins' participation included a floral message which stated, "Mum, the most beautiful woman in the world, love, Ron," from Ronnie to his mother, which illustrates the devotion of the twins to their mother. The following year, the twins did not seek permission to attend their father's funeral in March 1983. In 1985, Ronnie found love with a woman for a second time when he married Elaine Mildener at Broadmoor Chapel having laid the foundations of the relationship when she wrote letters to him and his brother while they were in prison. Ronnie allegedly felt he had found his soulmate despite him ruling out sex and intimacy in the relationship, but the continual visits to prison were an obvious hindrance, and they divorced in 1989. In 1990, Ronnie married Kate Howard, who he met when Reggie asked her to deliver him some letters. She was visiting a friend and fellow inmate at Gartree Prison, Leicestershire, which is where Reggie was serving his sentence at the time. After a whirlwind romance, Ronnie proposed to Kate on her second visit. However, the marriage ended in divorce in 1994. In the early 1990s, the twins received huge media attention following a biographical film that earned the Krays estate an estimated £225,000 on top of revenues from book releases and interviews. Such was the twins' popularity that there was a campaign to release the twins in 1993, with some corners of the public arguing their sentences were too harsh given the good deeds they did for many living in the East End, as well as their self-declared code that acts of violence were only inflicted against fellow criminals. Several hundred campaigners mustered at a rally in Hyde Park, London, before marching to the Prime Minister's headquarters in Downing Street, Westminster, to submit a petition signed by 10,000 people. Actors from the popular TV soap EastEnders, including Patsy Kensit, Roger Daltrey, and friend Barbara Windsor, were among those supporting the release, with some questioning Ronnie's mental health and his fitness to remain in prison. Despite the popularity of the campaign, the government took no action, and the show of support ultimately failed in its aims, although it continued to fuel media interest, with many journalists visiting the twins in prison. Following one such interview, Ronnie enraged fellow inmate Peter Sutcliffe, who learned that during the interview Ronnie had exposed Sutcliffe for additional crimes to a female handwriting expert who had been visiting him in order to obtain information regarding unsolved crimes. Sutcliffe was known as the Yorkshire Ripper and had already been convicted for murdering 13 women in the Yorkshire area in England. Sutcliffe overpowered Ronnie, allegedly throwing him against a wall like a rag doll. The defeat shocked Ronnie, who had his entire life been the one to overpower his opponents. On the 15th of March 1995, Ronnie suffered a heart attack at the age of 61 and died 2 days later at Wrexham Park Hospital in Berkshire. His funeral was held on the 29th of March at St Matthew's Church, Bethnal Green, drawing crowds of people for the procession, which saw the sombre image of his big brother Charlie crying on Reggie's shoulder, who had been granted permission to attend. In 1997, Reggie married Roberta Jones at Maidstone Prison 1 year after they first met. Roberta worked in publishing and media and became fascinated with his intricate character, which led to her publishing a biography called Reggie Kray, A Man Apart. In June of the same year, his brother Charlie, who had been released from prison in 1974, was found guilty of masterminding a £39 million cocaine plot after undercover police caught him with 2 kilograms of the drug worth £63,000, which resulted in him receiving a 12-year sentence. Although Reggie and the late Ronnie were not directly involved, they still ran business enterprises from prison, which went beyond selling their story. Their company, called Krays Enterprises, was set up with them named as the directors. It offered a bodyguard service to Hollywood stars and Arab noblemen, according to a business card discovered by prison guards, with Frank Sinatra said to have been one of their clients. On the 4th of April 2000, Charlie Kray suffered heart complications and died at St Mary's Hospital while serving 3 years of his sentence at Parkhurst Prison. Reggie was allowed to attend his brother's funeral, which saw him buried near Ronnie, Francis and his parents at Chingford, East London. Reggie, at this time, had rediscovered religion and was a practicing Christian, but his health was also deteriorating, having been diagnosed with terminal bladder cancer earlier that year, which resulted in him being transferred to Norfolk and Norwich Hospital on the 17th of August. On the 26th of August, the Government Home Secretary, Jack Straw, authorised Reggie's release from Wayland Prison on compassionate grounds after serving 32 years of his sentence. He returned to live with his wife, Roberta, in a suite at the Townhouse Hotel in Norwich, England. Reggie put security in place for them. As he was well aware of the media attention his release had rekindled, he celebrated with champagne, listening to music, while also finalising his funeral arrangements. In his last interview for a BBC documentary called The Final Word, Reggie refused to apologise for much of his violent past, as he felt it was too late and nothing could be done about it, while also commenting that on the night he murdered McVitie, it felt rushed, but it was justified, recalling he felt more anger at that point than ever before or again in his life. On the 1st of October 2000, Reggie died in his hotel bed at the age of 66, with his funeral held at St. Matthew's Church, focusing on his born-again Christianity as opposed to his former criminal life. It was estimated that 2,500 mourners attended on the day, which, although high, was significantly lower than the 60,000 who attended Ronnie's. Reggie was laid to rest in the family plot at Chingford alongside his family, who played such a key part in his life. Even though the entire Krays family was now dead, interest in their exploits persisted and grew as new information came to light about their criminal activities. One such allegation was shared in 2019 when Graham Satchwell implicated the twins in the 1963 Great Train robbery. The ex-police detective Satchwell was assigned to investigate one of the biggest robberies in British history when, on the 8th of August, a gang led by Bruce Reynolds tampered with railway signals to stop a Royal Mail train en route from Glasgow to London before driving it half a mile to Bridego Railway Bridge in Ledburn, where they unloaded onto vehicles approximately £2.5 million worth of old banknotes, the equivalent of approximately £40 million in today's money. Although never proven, Satchwell claimed the Krays twins undertook numerous trips to Glasgow prior to the robbery and were once mentored by London-born Billy Hill, who was one of the 12 men eventually captured and charged with the crime, which resulted in a collective sentence of 100 years between all of those proven to be involved. Satchwell says that the Krays were enforcers who protected the operation behind the scenes, and that without their connections, it is hard to accept that the men who were caught and convicted for the crime would have been capable of successfully carrying out the heist. Only a small fraction of the money stolen was recovered. There have been at least 5 films based on the Krays twins or their associates, with the 2015 Legend film starring Hollywood actor Tom Hardy arguably becoming the most famous, with a box office income of around $43 million. In addition, there have been more than 50 books released from various sources, ranging from books written by the twins and members of the firm themselves, to a publication written by a former model whose mother used to cut their hair. It is likely that folklore blurs the truth about the twins' lives, but what is certain is that the twins have achieved a level of fame few criminals ever possess. Views on the twins varies widely, with both detractors and those more sympathetic to the twins participating in a never-ending round of debate over the twins' lives. Often compared to American gangsters of the 1920s, many choose to downplay the violence of the firm and focus instead on the positive aspects of Reggie and Ronnie's empire. However, that is not to say all were enamoured with the twins. From 1966, their popularity did start to waver even in their own East End area as the twins' violence was witnessed more publicly and as Ronnie developed increasingly unpredictable behaviour, unnerving people. The twins' targeting of associates such as Payne and McVitie also did little favours to their image. Firm member Freddie Foreman admitted that if the twins had not gone to prison, they would have been assassinated due to a plan hatched at a London gang Council of War meeting that concluded the Krays were out of control and needed to be removed. An account by jewel thief Lenny Hamilton painted the twins in a negative light, describing them as bloody animals, himself having nearly had his eyes burnt out with a hot poker by Ronnie following a dispute. Another associate, known as Omani, worked closely in racketing for the twins, even after they went to prison in 1969, concluding himself that the Krays were not glamorous or good criminals, but were bullies who wasted their lives undertaking tragic crimes. What likely determined one's opinion of the twins depended ultimately on the interaction with them. One such example comes from singer and actor Jess Conrad, who in the 1960s met the Krays in a Soho London club. He was a young man and found himself in awe of them because of the way they dressed and handled themselves, combined with an underlying knowledge of the danger they could also present. Conrad said in a newspaper article that young men would often leave clubs if they knew the Krays were there in order to avoid being involved in violence or to avoid Ronnie, who, if attracted to them, would insist on taking them to parties which would end in sexual advances, and due to fear of the consequences, these could not easily be denied. Despite this, Conrad responded to a call by Ronnie to perform a gig for him while in prison, which he described as a bizarre moment, as he performed in a catsuit to 75 inmates. Silence met the performance until Ronnie shouted, "Yeah!" and the round of applause finally came, along with the £5,000 payment to the performer. In some ways, Conrad's experience brings together the positive and negative traits of the twins all together in one small anecdote. Glamour, awe, fear, criminality, money, and power. Many more descriptives could be used, but with contrasting views and evidence coupled with folklore entwined, it is up to each individual interested in their legacy to decide their own opinion of the men known as the Kray twins. What do you think of the Kray twins? Are the glamorized dramatizations of their lives and crimes justified? Or were they merely overgrown bullies who, rather than gaining honest employment, sought to threaten and exploit the community they were raised in? Please let us know in the comment section. In the meantime, thank you very much for watching.